Welcome to Training with Kayce. I'm your host, Kayce Cover. And tonight I'm going to talk about tools, tool use. I have a lot of notes this time because this is a controversial, complex subject. And a lot of people don't honor that. And I don't want to be one of those people. So I wrote a lot of notes. And I haven't analyzed it to tell you how many points there are. But what I can tell you is I want to talk about the trade-offs. Why do we have these tools? Are they justified? What happens if you don't have these tools? What do the tools enable you to do? Are there alternatives? What's your responsibility? How do the tools allow you to fulfill your responsibility? This is important. And the first thing I want to say is I'd like you to reflect on something, and I'd like to know your opinion on it. Here's the question. Is stress as damaging as pain? We know that stress kills. It can kill on the spot. An animal can have a heart attack or organ failure from a single session of acute stress. We need to have ways of preparing animals for stress and dealing with them. But if your training system, whatever it is, causes stress, is that less damaging than causing discomfort and or pain? So that's the thing I'd like to reflect on. In another question is, can you train dangerous dogs without tools? Because during the training, the animal is dangerous. Let's say you're a great trainer and you can quickly help the animal to develop into a responsible, safe, partner, member of society. Are you going to need to take the animal out in public to accomplish that? And if you do, what do you do so that you can safely take the animal from dangerous to cooperative and safe responsibly? At that time in the animal's training where he might lunge, he might jump at somebody, he might bark at them, he might bite them. How do you safeguard other people from that dog? How do you safeguard the dog from his own actions? How do you safeguard yourself? Because I've used food forever. I'm a dolphin trainer. That's my first professional thing. Well, dolphins weren't my first, but marine mammals were my first. And I went from there to dolphin training. And we didn't have physical punishers that we use with the dolphins, but people did use physical punishment. We didn't, I didn't, but trainers that had come before me used physical punishment with the animals. And there were other trainers at this time, and you got to recognize that these people didn't know. This was brand new to be keeping marine mammals in managed care. And they would use food restriction to make the food a more powerful reinforcer. And we ended up with some stunted animals. Is that better than having animals that you could punish if necessary? And anyway, even if you have a stunted animal, it still doesn't guarantee that the animal will respect every rule you put out and do everything you say for food or even for relationship. And let's say they will do it for you, for your friendship, for your relationship. 93% of the time, can you guarantee they will do it every time? And until you can guarantee that, what do you do to protect others, to protect the animal themselves? I think it's very ingenuous for people to criticize other trainers for using tools. And with dogs, the main ones, as I recall, would be e-collars, check chains, prong collars. And a lot of the dogs never have to have any of those. But dogs that are dangerous may require that. If a dog happens to be a very strong-minded dog that needs to learn why it's in his best interest, not talking about it's in your best interest or I'm going to give you a reason to be sorry. Now, I'm not talking about that. Through perception modification, we painstakingly show the animals why we're asking them to do what we ask them. And we work with them and they get to a point where they seem to agree. And they will maintain their behavior on their own without us having to oversee it. That is an amazing thing. It's a great thing. But until that animal gets to that point of being self-managing, you need, when you're out in public, you need to be able to protect everyone. And if you haven't trained that kind of dog, I'm going to say, I don't think you're entitled to an opinion on it. I don't think it's valid to say a dog is better off dead than ever experiencing an e-collar. I've experienced an e-collar. Please don't do me any favors and kill me before you give me a chance to learn something necessary, even with an e-collar. Okay? Now, I didn't like e-collars. I didn't like an e-collar used on me. But the person that I learned about this particular aspect of e-collars from is a wonderful trainer named George Cockrell. He's up in Maryland. And I watched him train a dog that had 6 owners. And the dog was in danger of being euthanized because one of the 6 owners was pregnant. And the dog was rambunctious. And they were worried that the dog might jump up on the bed and hurt the baby that was coming. And if the dog could not learn to be responsible for himself in a way that was safe with the baby, they would have to, at the very best, give him away. And more probable, because of the rambunctiousness of his behavior, euthanize him. And these owners were even told by a trainer that they should not go to any trainer that would use an e-collar because their dog was better off dead. Well, in my field of exotic animal training, I couldn't use an e-collar. I'd heard horrible things about them. So I asked George if he would teach me, he would let me learn from him what he did and how he did it. So this family came, and George just gently slipped an e-collar on this dog, and the dog started to get rambunctious, and George just stimulated that collar. Now, I must not have stimulated it at a very high level because the dog barely had a discernible reaction. The dog didn't tweak his neck and go, mm-hmm. The dog didn't even go, Burr. The dog didn't go, the dog just went, hmm, and moved closer to George. The dog recognized that something had changed when he had the collar put on by George. And do you know, in the time that I saw, George didn't even have to do anything to this dog except to give him information on what was to be done, what the dog needed to do to be successful and stay in his home with these people that loved him but had to be responsible about the new baby coming. So George also put the collar on the heel of the hand of each owner. So the dog responded very effectively and without any, any kind of pain, apparent pain or fear or anything else. He just looked like he had a little tiny epiphany without any kind of physical symptoms, crying, noise, jerking, startle, nothing like that. So each owner in turn held the collar against their palm, and George stimulated the collar. And the most sensitive person did not even discern the collar till they got to level 6, level 11. So the dog worked beautifully at level 6, and the owner could not even detect or discern level 6. They didn't even recognize that the collar had been stimulated till they got to level 11. And you know what? They were the most sensitive person in the group. The least sensitive person did not discern the collar until it was stimulated at level 21, I think. Yeah, it's a big difference. And while I was watching, George had introduced me and he mentioned, my background and some of my work and accomplishments. And so while they were watching their dog get trained, one of the owners came to me and asked me if I used an e-collar. And I said, no, I didn't. And they said they had been told by, I'm sure, a well-meaning trainer, but nonetheless by another trainer, that they should not, that it was inhumane for them to allow their dog to experience an e-collar trainer in order to save his life. Did I agree with that? Did I think they were wrong to give their dog this opportunity to save his own life? No, I don't think you're wrong. And I don't think that that's a realistic perspective. So you take me. I've known people that didn't spank their children. That was not my parents. My parents had very lively, rambunctious children. And every once in a while, we may have benefited from some definite limits. I'm going to tell you from my memory, sometimes I bought a punishment. If I wanted to do something badly enough, I'd weigh it against the consequences, and then I'd either do it or not. I knew ahead. Yeah, my parents were fair. The rules were communicated, the rules were consistent. And I made my choices accordingly. And it didn't ruin me. It didn't ruin me. If anything, it kind of taught me that I'm sturdy, that I'm durable, that I can navigate, survive, and triumph over things. I think that's a good thing. So I don't agree that people should not allow their dog to be exposed to an e-collar. So I talk about dangerous dogs, but there are some other situations where I might use an e-collar if I did that kind of work. So if you must have off-lead obedience with an animal near traffic or dangerous equipment, you need to protect that dog while he's learning to be reliable. If you have a dog whose actions could endanger someone else, you might need to use tools like that to get them through the proofing process. There's another situation too, but it just slipped my mind. Okay, if the dog is dangerous, if the dog's working in a dangerous area, if the dog's incorrect behavior could endanger somebody else. Let's say, if a dog ran out in the street in front of a car and got hit, he could not only get himself killed, but cause other people to get hurt or killed. So this is serious stuff. Okay, hopefully I'll think of the other reason as we're talking, because I'm peering at my notes and I don't see it. Okay, so let's say you're gonna decide that, oh, e-collars are very painful, but I love my dog so much and I think he can learn this. And so I'm going to make that decision for him. Is a good, long, healthy, happy life worth a tough week or even 2 tough weeks? I think it is. I honestly think it is. And I'm going to tell you, watching a lot of professional trainers use e-collars, and I still don't use them. I don't use them because I don't need to in general. And I can't use them with exotic animals anyway. So why would I switch techniques to something that works with some of the animals I train, but not all of them? I think it's simpler just to do it the way I do it. Okay, so I think, let me read my notes here. Oh, and trainers that use these things will say, like people that want to be able to use guns, the tool doesn't commit the crime, but they do enable the crime. Whether the crime is shooting somebody or traumatizing them or causing them pain. Does that justify other trainers bullying trainers that use e-collars, check chains, or slip chains, or prong collars? Now, before we answer that, I want to ask you another question to reflect on. We already asked you what's worse, stress or pain. Now I'm going to ask you, if you don't believe in any aversives with your animals that you're training, do you explain the job to the animal? How do you do that? Do you explain the job to your animal collaborator? And if you don't, how does the animal learn what he's supposed to do? What rules he's responsible for? What things will get him into deep trouble? Or do you just teach the animal how to do the thing and not proof it and hope for the best? Wait for the owner to find out where the dog breaks down and let you know, and maybe you have, you guarantee your training, and maybe you don't. So if you don't explain the job to the animal and the requirements, how does the animal learn? Does he learn by correction? What kind of correction is it? Does he learn by trial and error? Does he learn by luring? Do you understand the problems with each of those training tools? Because there are significant problems with each of them. I'm not going to go into it today, but that's another good subject for discussion. So I want to tell you what I do, because I already told you that I don't use e-collars for training. But I do give the animal a full explanation of the job and the rules. And I give him a lot of rich feedback, immediate rich feedback in the form of the intermediate bridge. So what's the process? Well, the first thing I do, which is counterintuitive to a lot of trainers, is I develop vocabulary. The animals I work with, all the animals, including my chickens at the University of Maryland, learn the names of all the activities, the locations, the people, other individuals, items, weather, food, everything, processes, protocols, everything. And we use that along with targeting to show the animal exactly what he's going to do. I'm going to tell you, I don't like to use luring. I see serious problems with luring. I don't like it at all, and I don't do that. I would probably use an e-collar before I would lure an animal. And that's a fact. But I don't lure animals. Instead, I'll use targets to draw out the behavior, to show the animal exactly how his body is going to move to meet my requests for this behavior. So vocabulary, which is developed through the process of name and explain, which is a process of rich narration to guide an animal through the environment, what's happening to and around the animal, and targeting. And as I'm developing this vocabulary, we are mental mapping. What? What am I talking about there? Well, I don't use a lot of repetition. In fact, I don't use virtually any repetition. I use probably what you could call progressive iteration. Think of it like grading the information for the dog or the animal. So you start out with one piece of information, and then you add another strand of information, and then another, and then another. And the next thing you know, you have this tapestry of knowledge and experience, and it's all interrelated. So let me give you a tangible example of that. This is your ear. This is your left ear. You have another ear. This is your other ear. It's your right ear. So you have a left ear and a right ear. How about eyes? Do you have eyes? Yes. Here is your left eye. Here is your right eye. Can you show me your right eye? Good. As the animal moves into contact with it. Can you show me your left eye? Good. Can you show me your left ear? Good. Can you show me your left eye? Good. Can you show me your left eye and your left ear? Good. Can you show me your right? Do you get it? We only did ear a couple of times, the left ear at least. And then we did the right ear. And then we did the left eye, and then we did the right eye. So we introduced the concepts of left and right and ears and eyes. And we did it in a few seconds, right? Less than a minute usually. It takes less than a minute to teach the difference between a left and right turn. This is very fast and efficient. So we don't do a lot of repetition. And I have been told by so many trainers that you have to do a lot of repetition because they are committed to creating these neural pathways where the animal stops thinking and just flows into a habit of conditioned response. And you know what? I don't want that. These same people that do this, I have heard them complain about the fact that their dog is an automaton, that they don't even like to work with their dog anymore because he's no fun, because he's just on automatic. It is mind-numbing to do 10 repetitions of every single step or more, and it is simply not necessary. In fact, I think it works against us to do that. So we have minimal repetition, and instead we have progressive relational iterations. An iteration is kind of like a recast of an effort. Like this is the first version, and now we're going to hone that a little differently to either accomplish the next thing or ask the next question. Now, during that, I also provide the rich feedback from the intermediate bridge, and that's at least 7.82 beats per second. And if the animal starts to go in the wrong direction, I can just stop the bridge, and the animal is only an eighth of a second away from the last time he was correct. And he will self-correct 9 out of 10 times. So there are 13 different applications for the intermediate bridge, in case you were wondering. One of them is self-correction. Another is decreasing latency. Another is intensifying the quality that the animal's demonstrating at the time of the bridging. There's a lot more. This is a really rich, powerful tool. And If you think food is good, you need to try this. This is so versatile, so powerful, and you can't always use food. So you need other tools that you're zen with, that you're fluent with. Okay, so then you've got to, let me read my dang notes, guys. Oh, all right. So I already mentioned this, but as you are training, just remember you're responsible. So it's up to you to prevent harm and damage to you, yourself, right? You're the only person that's going to keep yourself safe, the animals themselves, and other people. And you've got some options for doing that. One is an interrupt. But mind you, an interrupt does not necessarily decrease a behavior. An interrupt is not a punisher. It doesn't necessarily teach. It interrupts the animal's attempt to do something. In this case, we're thinking of something dangerous. So, what would an interrupt be for a dog that suddenly lunges at somebody else? And maybe they don't even want to bite that person. Maybe they're just excited and they want to jump up on them. Guess what? In some states, your dog can be deemed dangerous just from doing that. You can be sued for assault. If you don't know that, you need to study the laws of your state. So to interrupt that dog, you're going to have to be vigilant for every single time because it doesn't guarantee, by definition, it's not a punisher. It is just something that blocks behavior. Let me ask you this. If you have a Great Dane, a Dogo Argentino, a Great Pyrenees, or even a pit bull, what does your interrupt or your punisher have to be? What is so effective that in good conscience you can keep everybody safe? You might have to go to something aversive. You might have to go to something like water or vinegar water in a bottle. Do you know in the state of Virginia, it is illegal to even purchase or have on hand any liquid that could be used on a dog? You can't even legally spray water on a dog in the state of Virginia. Well, I personally think that's ridiculous. And I've never heard of them enforcing that, but that law is on the books. So if you think that you can avoid using something like a collar because you're going to take your trusty vinegar water bottle, you might need to think again. Now, here are the two things that I will often do, but I will use, let me just be absolutely clear on this. I will absolutely use a prong collar or a slip chain as a safety backup with a dog. And when I do, I will often have two collars on a dog. One is a regular collar and one is a prong collar usually. And I'll just use the flat collar unless I need the other one. And I have connectors so that if something breaks, I don't lose the dog. So the name of the game is to responsibly protect everyone. But to tell you the truth, I just really very, very rarely have to use anything like this. Now, I'm not saying I never do anything. I never punish any dog, but it isn't very common if I am, well, it's just not very common at all. So how do I get around this most of the time? I communicate with the dog ahead of time. I Negotiate with them with if-then statements. If you stay easy, we can go for a walk. This is one of the places where building the vocabulary really pays off. You want to see a dog really come to work for managing his own behavior, start negotiating with him. And Vilma I'm sorry, Shani, you get Shani, Vilma Shani from Middle Europe. I really admire his work. I have his book, and he talks about using conditional statements. I fell off my chair. I've never encountered another person that used conditional statements with their animals. I do it all the time. And he said, this is such a powerful tool. I don't know why more scientists don't use this. Absolutely agree with him. But a lot of trainers don't think you can profitably talk with a dog. Okay, so I grew up on the Keeler method. And I think the Keeler method is absolutely brilliant. Keeler was outstanding in figuring out the steps that would give you really reliable, like off-lead behavior. Amazing the way he figured it out, and not intuitive as far as I'm concerned. But the weakness that I found with his technique is that he didn't have a way for the dog to just be able to do the behavior correctly. He didn't have a way to explain what he wanted before they started the work. So the dog had to learn by being corrected. So there's infinite possibilities. Dog has a collar and he's attached to a lead. And the trainer would change directions if they noted that the dog wasn't paying attention. So then the dog would get a leash correction. And nowadays, and I got to admit, Mr. Keeler had a rather rough, like self-presentation in his books. He would talk about, if you're a lily-livered whatever, you might result in your dog dying, and you needed to come to the plate and do your duty to your dog. So there are a lot of horrified reactions from people about this kind of training. But I'm going to tell you, I knew the dogs that he trained for Disney, the Red Arrow Kennel dogs. Those were fantastic dogs, and they were Irish setters. Irish setters are notoriously high energy, not necessarily, they're just like all over the place and not necessarily thinking about what they're doing. Doesn't mean they're not smart. But, they're hunting dogs. They've got a lot of energy. They want to go work, and they don't want to sit around at home. So, in my experience with training dogs that way, they quickly learned what the rules were. They quickly became skilled. They quickly started loving training. And they very seldom ever had to have a correction because they were dedicated to the training and they liked it and they did it. So even if you really disagreed with Mr. Keeler's methods, it really wasn't prolonged misery. It was short, effective training. But I think we've gone even better because with the methods of name and explain and targeting, we can explain to the animal exactly what we want to do. I'm going to tell you what, I think it is significantly better than operant conditioning, which relies on rote repetition and trial and error. And if you think back to watching dogs work on operant conditioning, I know that you are going to remember dogs that got really stressed, dogs that shut down and simply wouldn't work that way. Not all dogs can cope with trial and error. It doesn't make the dog bad. It doesn't mean he has to be euthanized, but it might help if you tried a different technique. And luring dogs isn't exactly teaching them, and there are problems with that. You'll get the appearance of having a trained dog, but the dog doesn't necessarily consciously understand what he's doing. And when you do get behaviors by using these techniques, and you think, what could be nicer because I use food to get this dog to do this thing? Check out Dr. Lustig's book, The Hacking of the American Mind. And he talks about how food is addictive, how food causes dopamine. So you're actually using drugs to train the dog when you're using food. Is that horrific? Not usually, although you can do it very badly. Just because you're using food doesn't mean you're nice to the dog. Okay, even if you claim it, it doesn't mean that. But biochemically, this dog will get dopamine, and dopamine is very addictive. And all trainers that use food are aware that there are cases where they have problems of weaning the food out of the situation. And remember that safety backup issue? If you're dependent on food, you don't have a trained dog, you have a managed dog. In the same way that if you're dependent on an e-collar, you don't have a trained dog, you have a managed dog. You have a trained dog when that animal responds appropriately to the cue without any kind of coercion. That you don't have to enforce the behavior. So you see, you've got an overlap here. You've got a time where you're teaching the behavior and you need to have safety backup. And then you have the time where you've completed the behavior, but did you proof it? And if you did proof it, do you still need safety backup? These are important questions. Okay, we're almost to the end. So besides, I've got to say a couple of things about this slip collar and the prong collar. Okay, and this is from my personal history. Like I said, grew up on the Keeler method, and I have a huge collection of check chains, beautiful ones, all kinds. And my dogs wear them a lot at the time. I remember going into a PetSmart, and one of the sales attendees started following me around. And then she kind of painfully and condescendingly explained to me that they had collars where I wouldn't have to use that collar. Well, of course, I was aware of that. But what she didn't even notice is I never touch my dog's collars. The slip collar, when you have developed the dog's understanding of it, not necessarily by yanking on their neck, but by teaching them how you're going to cue them, that slip collar can be like a whisper to the dog. And I'm not talking about a threat of coercion or pain. I'm talking about where we create the behaviors using bridge and target, and then we fade them onto the slip chain safety backup. So that if we were ever in a situation where we had to get a dog out of that, whatever we were in, immediately, we're already set up to go. Okay. And it can also be other kinds of things. It could be a halter. On my monkey, I always had a halter because if I had to get her off the ground and onto my shoulder to protect her from an oncoming dog, I was ready to go. You got to think about safety backup all the time. It's our job. Okay. And then I went to work with this wonderful, brilliant dog. She was a world-class dog and a world-class criminal at first. And she wanted to, kill and eat everything. People, dogs, puppies, cats. She was equal opportunity. And we set about to change that. And we didn't use an e-collar. And we didn't use harsh leash corrections or anything. We used perception modification. And in perception modification, we don't rely on any collars. Collars aren't even necessary until you go out the door when you use them for safety backup. And we don't use any kind of punishers, but we also don't use toys, and we also don't use food. Think about that. We correct the most difficult problems without relying on any extrinsic motivation or enforcement. So we're now ready to take this world-class criminal and go for a walk outside. And her diligent, intelligent, dedicated owner comes to me and says, "What collar should I use?" And I said, "Doesn't matter to me. Use any collar you want." And she says, "Well, what collar would be best?" And I said, "We're not using collars to do the training. The collar is just for safety backup. And any collar that you have would be adequate for that." "Well, I just don't know what collar to choose." "Okay, let's let the dog choose." So I identified that two collars for the dog, like a flat collar, a martingale or something, and the prong collar. The dog chose the prong collar. I was amazed. I didn't expect that. So I asked her again, and she chose the prong collar again. And I asked her a third time, and she chose the prong collar. And every time we went out for a walk, we let her choose her collar. And we made sure she had, she could see different collars, different choices, and so on. So as well as naming them and explaining them, we actually held them up. "Do you want this one or this one?" She always, always chose the prong collar. You know what she didn't want? She hated a head halter. Hated it. And I used them all the time. And here's how I used them. We negotiated ahead of time with the if-then statement. "If you stay easy, we'll go to the park and you can watch the squirrels. If you get alert, I'm going to put your head halter on." We go to the park. She sees the squirrels. She goes out of her mind. "I see by your barking that you need your head halter." "Ah, stupid woman, I don't want a head halter. It's just for 30 seconds. If you can get easy and stay easy for 30 seconds, you can have your head halter off." Oh boy, she hated that head halter. So then after 30 seconds, I took it off and I said, if you can stay easy, you can watch the squirrels. She barked one more time and it was half-hearted. She didn't bark for a bit and then she furtively glanced at me with a collar or with a head halter and then she barked, 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 and then she stopped and I put the halter on. I see by your behavior that you need your head halter. 30 seconds. I never had to put the head halter on her again. So there's a whole bunch of trainers that try to tell me that the head halter is more humane than a prong collar, but this dog did not agree. Now I'm going to say I'm not even against head halters, but how you use them and how they are configured makes a difference. I have a colleague that has developed a lead that she calls the sidekick. It's Heather Beck. And she has this collar, and a lot of trainers love them. And I think they're ingenious. I don't use those collars either for training because I don't use collars and leashes for training in general. I will often demonstrate things with collars and leashes because when you're outside, you still need safety backup. You still need to keep the dog on task and so on next to you when you can't control the environment. Because maybe you could train outside as long as a rabbit doesn't run through your yard or a hummingbird come. Yeah, all these things have happened. Okay, so there are worse problems than an e-collar or a slip chain or a prong collar or even a head halter. And those problems include the dog not knowing that there are rules, the dog not learning what the rules are, the dog not mastering the rules, the dog lacking the skills to navigate the rules, the dog losing his life because nobody made sure that the dog learned the rules. So I'm going to say that you've got a huge responsibility to educate that dog so that he can be a competent member of society. And if you can't do it with your preferred tools, you're still responsible to do it. Now, another thing that is a bad break for a dog is if he has a trainer who is not competent. If he has a trainer that doesn't understand communication and motivation. Because let's face it, if you are going to use an e-collar, you are more likely to use it at a higher setting if you are not good at explaining to the animal, if you're not good at motivating the animal, if you set the dog on edge so he wants to get away from you. And finally, a worse thing is the dog not attaining the milestones. So what are the milestones? The milestones in my system are a process of a series of understandings that the dog attains. And you're going to recognize that it's the same ones where I said about the rules. A dog needs to be able to manage his mental state in order to honor the rules. Because when a dog gets too emotionally extreme, he loses the ability to follow rules. He loses the ability to think. And he can do something horrific in a very short amount of time. So The dog needs to learn that he has a mental state, like easy versus alert. He needs to learn that he has two, so opposing concepts. He needs to learn that he can go between those two states. Then he needs to learn how to do that. And then he needs to study that subject enough that he comes to the conclusion that he is going to manage himself. And when I say he is going to manage himself, I'm not enforcing that. That is just the conclusion he comes to. And until that animal not only makes that decision, but becomes expert at maintaining his ability to honor his own choices and decisions in that, I need safety backup things. Now, just because I need safety backup, I told you the dog didn't honor my rule about the squirrels, and I had to use safety backup, but I only had to put it on the dog, not even walk with her, just put it on her for 30 seconds. 2 times. That's 1 minute of time. I didn't haul her around. I sure didn't crank her neck around so she could get a subluxated spine. I just gave her a consequence. And that was plenty. I can't tell you how many times, and often I use the head halter. And the owners always had head halters. And now I'm just realizing I don't even own one. And maybe I need to go out and get one if I'm going to ever start training people's dogs again. But anyway, so you need to have safety backup in your training all the time, even though you may never, ever use it. Even if your training system is so thorough and so well designed that you explain everything to the animal and it really understands what you want to do, and you present it to the animal in such a way that they quickly gain the knowledge and the skills to meet your request. And even if that dog is fantastic, because you never know when the dog's going to, step in it. I'll tell you this real thing in New York City. Dogs walking along on the subway grates getting shocked. So you already know that if a dog gets shocked from something, they may redirect on somebody else. So yeah, you gotta you can't just have your dog walking off lead in New York City and wandering onto these potential hazards or into a street. Or here's something else I've seen in New York City: big rats all over the place, clinging on the underside of the manhole covers. Like there are manhole covers in New York City where they're not solid. You can see the rats running around. I remember this one lady, we were in Chinatown, and she's cooking on the street, and the rats are running around right under where she's cooking, and you're watching them right there. So your dog could get nipped. His foot could get caught in one of those grates. There's all kinds of hazards. We need safety backup. So we've got safety backup. Let me talk about how we transition from an untrained dog to a very reliable dog. And in my system, and I know that Matt is similar in this way, this whole discussion came to my mind because I reposted a post from Matt Welch, who has saved the lives of so many dangerous pit bulls that I don't even know if he has count of them. He has guided them to reclaim and recreate their own lives. And he had a picture of, I don't know, 6 dogs standing all packed together like they were in a sardine can. And they were all dogs that are known to tend to be dog aggressive. Well, if Matt's working with them, they're almost certainly dog aggressive because that's his specialty. And he is really, really good at it. He can get in there with a dog that is considered unsafe to even be with. And in a very short amount of time, a few hours, he can be walking that dog. That dog will be like kissing him on the cheek. Matt is really outstanding at this. But as that dog is learning to run, free and to come instantly on request, et cetera, Matt's responsible for that dog and any damage he might incur to others or to himself. So he's going to need, or let me quit talking about Matt because I can't speak for Matt, but I can speak for myself when I have done similar kind of training. Going to have the safety backup on that dog all the time, even if he's just pulling it, having a little tab on his neck on a different collar, even if he has an e-collar on. He may never even experience a single episode. So if you see a collar on a dog and you jump to the conclusion that that means that that person trains using these, these tools, you might be absolutely wrong. So what could be the case instead is the dog is taught without any tools at all. And then when you're transitioning into the complex environment, you have to up the safety protection. Boy, on this post, all these people came running in to the conversation to demand to know why this dog had this kind of leash on. Why was I promoting somebody that was an aversive trainer? It's like you don't even know how this person trains. And I just told you that they can safely turn around this kind of dog. You need to be listening and not having outrageous indignation because it's getting in the way of your power and your contribution to dogs or other animals. So I know you guys are well-intentioned. I know you're going to be great. I know you don't want to be cruel. I know you don't want to be harsh. I know you don't want to be associated or pegged as one of those kinds of trainers. But don't peg other trainers with that either. Now, if a trainer is harsh, I don't support that either. But I don't assume that a trainer is harsh just because of the tool. Just like I don't assume that somebody is violent because they have a gun. My father was in the military. He had guns because of his work. My father was a hunter. He had guns because of that. Policemen have guns to protect people and to do their job. The gun is not the problem. Same thing. You want to get after somebody, consider doctors. They're using poison, radiation, scalpels, needles. They stick needles in you. I mean, I hope this is sounding ridiculous. We need to have respect for one another and to just hold off. And, guys, I probably was just as indignant, and I know I was dang arrogant when I was young. But as you get more and more experience and you live through more and more extreme things, you learn that life is way more complex than you realize. So all you aces out there, Just breathe. And if you think somebody is suspect, study it. But don't go off half cocked and accuse them of things and, all this stuff. It's erroneous. And I want to say one last thing. I had, I think I didn't mention this, but I asked George Cockrell to try the collar on me. So he put it against my hand, and I asked him to please start at 1. And I would see if I could feel this collar. And he said, there's no way you'll feel it at 1. Well, he was right. I didn't. So then I said, okay, well, you go up to 2, level 2. All right. I didn't feel that either. But level 3, I could feel, and I started flicking my finger every time I felt the stimulus. And he said, Kayce, there's no way you can feel it at 3. And I go, well, you're the one doing the stimulus. Am I matching it with my finger? And so he watched for a minute. He goes, yes, you are. You're weird. You are wired weird. Well, let me tell you what's weird about it. There was no pain involved at all. I could barely perceive it. And when I did perceive it, I'm sitting there real quietly, focused to discern a difference. And like that Weimaraner, I discerned a tiny difference. No pain, but I felt a little twinge over my left eyebrow. Now, remember, it was on the heel of my left hand. And I felt a feeling of pressure, like somebody had their hand beside my head, right outside my right temple. And I found myself getting cross. I said, George, I can't turn it off. He goes, just turn it off. How do I turn it off? Well, you just do the behavior. I didn't know what the behavior was. And you know what? An e-collar stimulates more than one kind of nerve. And I found I couldn't think with the e-collar working. But the answer to that could be to thoroughly teach the dog before you ever bring an e-collar into the equation. And then I saw, quote unquote, purely positive trainers that were very arrogant and were publishing their great video on e-collars to show people why they didn't want an e-collar. And they put e-collars on people and shocked the heavens out of them. And the people were like doing this and jerking their heads around and all this stuff. And they're trying to show that these are cruel and unusual things. But the thing is, I actually go out and watch people training with all different kinds of techniques, including e-collar. And I never once saw a trainer use an e-collar in the way they were portraying as the way everybody used them. Are there trainers that do that? There may be. And if they do that, I'm against it. But there's a lot of trainers that don't do that at all. And you're kind of slandering them to misrepresent the training they do. And there are so many dogs that die for lack of help. I don't use e-collars, but if you know how to use e-collars to save a dog's life, get busy. Go help those dogs. This is what we need to do, guys. It's not about our ideology. It's about helping as many dogs and as many people as we can, as effectively as we can, as safely, as quickly as we can. So keep up the good fight. Please keep, studying and discerning. You got to have discernment. You've got to observe. You can't get all emotional and go off half-cocked. And if you start to do that, just breathe, start over again, You'll get there. It may take you 50 years like it did me. That's okay. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Take care, and I look forward to next time. And thank you to those that click the like and the subscribe. It really, really helps. We have grown considerably and couldn't do it without you. All right, good night.